friends. Welcome back to the unofficial companion podcast to HBO Max's hit show Industry with us, the Wall Street Skinny. So for those of you who don't know us, I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
We are two lifelong friends, former investment bankers, and teachers here to give you the skinny on what the show gets right, what it gets wrong, and to tell you where all the drama intersects with real life. So today we're going to tackle episode 3. And for those of you who...
I'm terrified. I'm terrified. Jen's like, I have 20 pages and it's a PhD level thesis on...
I have 20 pages of notes from the show. I got a little bit carried away. So we may need to break this into a 2-parter. I'm hoping we can cover everything that I want to talk about today. But a lot went down in this episode. They are just ramping up everything with the finance, with the sex and the drugs.
Yeah. It's like I walked into the bathroom and he followed me in and offered me acid. Like, what? I mean, like, why? Anyway, we'll get to that. But yeah.
So episode 3 opens with Harper having recently moved into the spare room in Yasmin's basement apartment under her parents' home. And they're talking about this guy, Greg, on the desk, who is one of the more senior salespeople, but isn't an MD. Yeah. And Yasmin is kind of teasingly urging Harper to ask him out for coffee. And she's hinting at a potential romance there. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's like the kind of girl talk that you'd have with your friends. Mm-hmm. But the question is, are they friends? Because Harper has a lot of reason to not like Yasmin from previous episodes. Yasmin really wants to build a relationship with Harper, so we'll kind of see that dynamic play out over the course of this episode. So Harper brings up the idea of paying rent because she's been staying there for free. And Yasmin's like, she comes from wealth, right? So she's like, oh, don't worry about it. And anyone who's ever stayed with a friend for a prolonged period of time knows that relationships can get really problematic when specific boundaries aren't set.
I think it's also awkward for Yasmin too, because it's not like it's her own house either. It's her parents' house. So I think that there's a little bit of like, she feels really awkward to have Harper pay her when she's living for free in her parents' house. And we're going to see this over the course of this episode, that like the dynamic between not feeling like you owe someone something. So that's why, you know, Harper wants to pay rent, but it's still like this awkward thing where it's like, do I let her pay rent even though I don't need the money and I'm staying for free in my parents' house? So it's this whole thing where they're starting, like there's boundaries that have to be set. And like this is, so it starts.
And I think it's very classic too. You know, Yasmin's like, oh, just get something nice for the kitchen. And Harper's like, I don't even think I know what goes in a kitchen like that. And it just goes to show how Yasmin, coming from this place of privilege, is like, money doesn't matter. Well, it actually made me think of that scene from episode 2 where Harper's talking to the potential roommate and he's like, isn't it gauche to judge success with money? And she's like, not if you've ever had any, right?
And this comes up also when casually Yasmin's like, oh, just get lilies for this dinner party I'm having. And she goes to get lilies and they're like, it's 55 pounds. And again, it's one of these things where Harper has this feeling of she owes her, you know what I mean? Like she owes her, she needs to get the lilies and then she's going to get it. And it's just like such a non-thing. Just get some lilies. She's like 55 pounds. You effing kidding me? So yeah.
That's exactly right. So Yasmin's gross boyfriend, Seb, comes home totally drugged up with the guy who runs his company. I mean,
his brother.
Harper asked the question, are all British guys pathological drug addicts? Which is exactly how I'm feeling watching this show. I'm like, how are you functioning?
No, the drugs are a lot.
Also, another thing that's perpetually perplexing about the scenes from the mornings in this show is it's like bright and sunny and they're having their coffee. It reminds me so much of the opening sequences of Grey's Anatomy show. It's like they're in Seattle. It's always like bright and cheery and sunny and they're having their beautiful morning coffee, but also they're starting the 5 a.m. shift at the hospital. That's exactly how it feels here. Where's the rain in London? Where's the dark and gloomy pre-dawn bankers walking to work? So I'm always curious why they're having these like lovely strolls in the morning sunlight. It doesn't track.
Well, I will say, I do think that part of it was like they're walking to work and Harper says, I keep getting that feeling when I wake up. Like, I can't believe I'm here. So I do think part of it too is like they're trying to have part of it just signal like visually that she still feels like, oh my gosh. I mean, because again, I remember having that feeling when I first started at Morgan Stanley where it's like, I can't believe I actually am here. Like I'm actually in New York City, and obviously Harper's in London. Like, so I think that there's probably a little bit of that, but I'm 100% with you. Like, no, it's dark.
So we start with the big morning meeting. And I think we remember from earlier episodes, this morning meeting starts probably around 7:15, something like that. Eric, the managing director, strolls in and he says, the traders will be in with their axes. Double sales credits this month to anyone who fills them. Let's pause here and explain what this means. Now, we discussed axes over on the big podcast on our 100th episode with Jamie Patton, but we'll review it here. So axes are trades that the trading desk is trying to get done. And I always thought the name came from having an axe to grind. Listeners, if you know otherwise, please correct me because I've never met anyone who actually knows where the term originates. But look, this can be for various reasons, and it can look different for different trading desks. So generally speaking, an axe involves when one client puts the trading desk into more risk of a certain position than they want to keep on or can easily hedge in the open markets. And so I'm going to kind of give you like the 101, 201, and 301 level explanation of what axes can look like. 101 level is most people understand corporate bonds in inventory, right? The credit desk might have some Amazon bonds or some Microsoft bonds that they have in the shelves of their proverbial warehouse that they want to sell for some reason. They might be asked to sell those for a slightly lower price or slightly cheaper than you could get them from the bank across the street. That's kind of like if you run a general store and you've got whatever, cereal and fruits and vegetables in inventory. You've got some bananas that are lying on the shelf and they're going to go rotten in a couple of days if no one buys them. You might cut the price. So that's exactly what Rishi says. Rishi's our trader. He's our stand-in for all traders everywhere, apparently.
Yeah.
And he
says
says
his own little macro hedge fund on the
exactly. He says, I've got some mid-market offers on corporate bonds. I would love them to be moved this morning. So that's saying if you look at the market on, again, let's make up Amazon's bonds, and they're priced at 99 on the bid side and 101 on the offered side, Rishi would be willing to sell them for 100. Now, some products don't trade like that, where you don't have physical inventory and they don't exactly trade on a one-for-one basis. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take an interest rate swap. Okay, this is an interest rate derivative. We've spoken about the mechanics before. We're not going to get in the weeds here. But there are a whole number of standard structures that are relatively easy to trade. Okay, let's take 2-year rates. Effectively, all a 2-year swap rate is the yield on the current 2-year treasury plus or minus some spread. So if a client wants to pay fixed on a 2-year interest rate swap, it's relatively easy to hedge with some combination of 2-year treasuries and 2-year spreads. But what if the client does a huge trade that would move the market a huge amount, more than the amount of bid offer you can charge that client to hedge it? You might then show an axe to all your salespeople and be like, hey, listen, I'm a better payer of 2-year rates. Call all your clients, let them know in case anyone needs to do something. That's something you might do. Or there are some structures that are much less liquid that still trade fairly frequently. So instead of trading 2-year rates, which again, relatively liquid standard, what if a client wants to trade something like 8-year rates, or even worse, something like 2-year rates 6 years forward? There's no stack, right? This isn't like equities where you go and there's a whole list of bids and offers for 2-year rates 6 years forward, right? And you just go down the stack. It doesn't work like that. You can't just pull up that screen. There aren't even 8-year on the run treasuries. The US Treasury only issues 7s and 10s. So you've got to do this in some combination of what are called butterflies, like 5, 7s, 10s. You've got to do this in some combination of 7s, 10s. And by the way, in US, this only trades in 1-year gaps. It's very, very complex to hedge. So you might quietly show some access to some clients to help you get out of this risk. Because otherwise, you're going to be paying bid offer on all these little things to try to hedge your position because it's not super liquid. That's kind of the 201 level. Then there's the 301 level, which is you may not actually need to do anything at all, but you want to find out information. Sometimes traders are trying to sniff out what clients are doing. So they'll publish axes to try to draw them out. And even if they weren't actually a better bid or a better offer in that specific structure or product, it's worth it for the information value to know what those clients are doing. And it's worth it to show a better than market price for that information value. Does that make sense?
Got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Eric is saying double sales credits to anyone who fills the traders on their axes. Sales credits are something we've talked about on the big podcast, but it's worth reiterating here. We got a lot of questions about this on social media about how it all works and how do salespeople get paid. Traders are the ones taking actual risk, and they make and lose hard dollars in P&L, which stands for profit and loss, on behalf of the firm. Salespeople, with a few exceptions, do not take risk. They are responsible for bringing that risk into the firm by building relationships with clients who then come to the firm to execute those trades so the traders can make money off of those trades. It is not, at least when it comes to the type of salespeople and the type of clients that industry is depicting, it's not a commission-based business. First of all, if it were a commission-based business, the numbers would be huge. Salespeople would be getting paid like $20 million if it were a commission-based business. If commissions lined up with sales credits, they get a number assigned to their name called sales credits, which is funny money that's representative of the opportunity for the trading desk to make money and give you some corresponding number. They usually have set schedules for, okay, this size trade in this specific product equals X number of sales credits. And you just apply that math and scale it up and down, right? And it's different for each product, for each desk. And sometimes the trading desk has discretion to say, hey, you know what? We made a ton of money off that trade. We're going to pay you double sales credits, right? And that's what Rishi's saying he'll do here for these axes. Mm-hmm. Now, the tricky thing is, what happens when the desk loses money? That's a more complex problem that's handled differently at a lot of different banks. When I was at one particular bank, there were no such thing as negative sales credits. And then I went across the street to another bank and they were like, there's definitely negative sales credits. And so it sucks because as a salesperson, you don't have a hedge. If my client's behaving badly and the desk loses money off that, the desk is going to put my client in the box anyways. They're going to treat my client like shit if they ever come in for an inquiry again anyways. Like, I'm going to get punished for that as it is.
Why? I'm sorry. Can you just explain, like, when you say that, is because they want to buy stuff that you like, that the trader doesn't want to sell? Like, what
so for
could
example,
they do?
If someone comes in for like a trade that's slightly difficult to hedge and they spray the street and they go to 10 dealers all at once and hit this dealer and that dealer and that dealer and that dealer. When you're in that chain, you're not going to be able to go to the market and then hedge that effectively because everyone's going the same way. It's going to collapse out from under you, right?
Got it.
So that can be an example of them behaving badly. And then once you get all those sales credits assigned to your name, it then becomes a political battle every single year between sales and trading to decide what your actual bonus pool is based on those sales credits. Because obviously trading wants to keep the P&L for themselves. They're like, we took all the risk. And sales is like, well, you took this risk because we brought it to you. We should be entitled to some portion of it. So every single year, there's the same political battle that's been waged at banks since like the dawn of time. So as this morning meeting is progressing, Eric also says, we need to be sharper at packaging trade ideas across asset classes. This is a constant push in sales. And I've spoken about this before, about how the rates desk often becomes the cross-asset desk or the macro sales desk because rates sits at the intersection of everything.
I mean, again, they are cross-product sales is the name of their desk too.
Exactly. And that's what rates often gets rebranded, because when you've got your client's ear about rates, you've kind of got their ear about everything because rates are involved in everything. But many interest rate products are very vanilla. And so as things get more electronic, increasingly they don't allow for as much bid offer. Enter exotics. So specifically, correlation trades are trades that we would structure across various asset classes that have something other than a one-to-one correlation to one another. And you can trade that correlation itself by coming up with really cool exotic structures if that correlation looks rich or cheap. So what's correlation in the first place? Let's think of two things in everyday life that are highly correlated. And this is kind of a classic example. I didn't come up with this on my own. This is how I was taught what correlation is. But a classic example of correlation is, okay, eating ice cream and getting sunburned. Ice cream doesn't cause sunburns, but you tend to eat ice cream when the sun is out. It's hot, the weather's nice, right? It's not a one-to-one correlation.
I've heard this example, but it's been like murders and ice cream, because basically like crime and this was, I think, was the Freakonomics classic example, because again, the murder rate goes up in the summer because it's warm. People also eat more ice cream, but it's just so funny. You're like sunburn. And meanwhile, I'm like over here like, no, murders. Anyway.
I guess mine's the G-rated example that I learned in high school. Yours is the Freakonomics example. That's funny. And people do correlation trades in finance all the time. So let's think about NVIDIA and the price of the S&P 500. Those prices have pretty much moved in lockstep over the past couple of years.
It's also because, again, it's NVIDIA holding up the S&P too, which is like, you know.
Of course,
I mean,
yes.
It's a huge portion of it.
That's why they effectively move in lockstep, right?
Yes,
so the fact that they don't have a one-for-one correlation, right? NVIDIA could have a down day while the S&P is up, but generally speaking, they are highly correlated. If you thought that correlation was overvalued, you might play for their prices to diverge. Maybe you'd buy calls on the S&P, thinking that index is going to go up, and buy puts on NVIDIA, meaning you think that that individual stock price will go down. Those basic trades, though, are in the same asset class. And people do that all day, every day. No one cares. Super vanilla, whatever. No bid offer, right? We would structure super complex stuff. Like you only own, you know, a high strike pay or swaption, which is effectively a put on bonds. If the price of gold does this and the price of S&Ps does this, you're buying or selling correlations that look rich or cheap at that particular time. And the exotics traders on the interest rate desk were typically the guys who were leading a charge on stuff like this. And the more exotic and the more asset classes involved, the better. Because there isn't exactly like a big liquid market. There's no trade web screen for the correlation between the price of gold, which is traded on exchange, and over-the-counter swaptions, which are a bespoke derivative product. So you can widen out bid offer on this stuff massively because it's super exotic and it's highly structured. And that's why sales and trading loves it. Because let's say you get paid, I don't know, 2,000 sales credits for 100 million worth of 5-year treasuries. You might get paid 500K or $1 million in sales credits for one of these super structured cross-asset trades. And clients love them because the whole point of these trades is you can theoretically get some kind of risk exposure cheaper than you otherwise would if the contingency weren't there. And that is the key. You only get whatever the exposure is if some correlated event, whether you've bought or sold that correlation, happens or doesn't happen. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Yeah.
So if you're just willing to pay full freight for the exposure, you can do it in a much more liquid way and pay less bid offer, but you're going to be buying all the individual components and not getting any savings for that. Does that make sense? So by buying or selling the correlation, it's like bundling. It's like you go to McDonald's, okay?
Yeah.
And
I get
the Big Mac, the soda, and the fries, all for
like
more than the Happy Meal, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Again, I know that this is like 501 level stuff right here. This is where your MIT PhD vol traders come in, not your Joe Blow salespeople like me, okay? I just know this conceptually enough and to be dangerous enough to explain how these trades are pitched and why everyone likes them. I'm not the one making the markets in them, and I'm not the one hedging them.
I mean, it's funny because, again, like shortly after, there's a scene where Gus basically walks up to Eric and asks him what he wants to be put on or what Eric wants to put Gus on. And Eric is like, what did you study? He's basically like, you're in my personal space, go away. And then he's like, what did you study? And Gus basically says humanities. And then he goes, how the fuck did you end up at a bank only in England? Which I thought was like, again, so appropriate given the conversation you just had. And also I was laughing because Jen, I know you were an English major. So it was just,
well, but there's something else to that scene as well, right? Because when Gus comes up and asks him, like, what's my assignment, sir? That's what you do in IBD, okay? You get assigned a project. There's a very clear scope of work. You know what your deliverables are. Yes. That's not sales and trading. And by the way, that's why I struggled so much during my internship. It was like, go learn something, add value. What does that fucking mean when you don't know what you're doing? In IBD, you're given discrete projects with measurable performance indicators. It's, did you build a model? Did you do the formatting correctly? Did you get the information on the PowerPoint slide and not screw up the font? Like poor Harry back in episode 1, right?
I know, yeah.
So, you know, in sales and trading, you are extraordinarily fortunate if either a junior person on the desk, which is most typical, takes you under their wing and shows you the ropes. To have an MD do it like Eric does it for Harper, I mean, lights out, absolutely incredible. So Gus is actually making a blunder by asking Eric, who's the head of the group, what he should be doing. Even though to like a layperson, that's a totally logical thing to do, right? I now work for you. What do you want me to do? So Eric is basically punishing him and showing him like, if you can't figure out how to add value, The only thing that you're cut out to do is look at this fan of paint colors and tell me which green I should use, right? And again, I had this exact same thing happen to me when I went to go work for a new MD. And I was like, hey, so where do I fit on this team? You know what she had me doing? Taking care of her dry cleaning.
The paint thing comes back later with Daria, which was funny. But like, by the way, also I had an MD and all he did all day long was decorating his house and he was very focused on it. So anyway, like all this all comes together, which is like very accurate. But one other quick thing, I did want to make the point that when Harper is talking about her trade idea, which she's going to pitch, and you can explain it to everyone, I did think it was so interesting that she was talking about a slowdown in housing. And so I do want to actually just remind people, because this was, again, from 2019. And what was wild is we've all seen what happened post-COVID. In 2019, especially in the suburbs, like, you could not give houses away in like the New York City suburbs. Like, well, in Charlotte, you probably you would have to buy them. But in New York, so we bought our apartment in New York City in 2015. And we were up in 2019. We had friends who bought in the suburbs in 2015, and they literally were down significantly. And then obviously post-COVID, it like completely flipped, where it's like, you cannot, I mean, again, I'm like, how did it flip so fast from 2019 to like 2021? It was just wild.
Interest rates went to zero.
I mean, but they were always pretty low. Like yes, but
they
like
went to zero.
Still, like right now, they're way higher, and still you can't buy a house. So I hear you, but it still felt like there was a glut of housing. There was too many houses, and yes, interest rates went to zero. I mean, our friend just flipped his house, made like 50% in about like a year in Greenwich. It's just like the market just went from being absolute garbage to gangbusters, which is a huge problem, obviously, and housing affordability is a huge deal. But anyway, I did want to make that point because, again, watching this show now, you're like, slow down in housing. What are you talking about? But again, remember, it was 2019 when this was recorded.
Well, and we also do know that this is against the consensus view, the house view within Peerpoint at the time.
Sure.
So let's talk about this. So Harper has this counter consensus view, like you said, that there's going to be a slowdown in housing. And Eric says, okay, well, so what's the play? What's your big trade idea? And remember, she's being encouraged to come up with cross asset ideas. So she says, gold, maybe a call option. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, gold is indirectly correlated to the strength of the housing market, because if the housing market looks weak, theoretically, it's because there's a very weak economy and rates are too high. Central bank policy will ease, rates will come down to stimulate the economy. That puts inflationary pressures on things and devalues your currency. Traditionally, gold is seen as a hedge against that. And so you might buy gold. So again, we're talking about the correlation there. So that's the initial trade idea that Harper comes up with. And Eric's like, that sucks. That's too vanilla. Go do something else, right? Yeah. Okay. So she gets sent off to work on that trade idea. Again, we're going to come back to that. So back to our friend Gus, by the way. Gus has been assigned to go work with Clement. We've talked about Clement before, and Clement is our old school sales guy. He's got one account, some guy named Kasparov. And the other thing I want to mention is that Clement already has an analyst, and it's Robert, Gus's roommate. And Yasmin's like flirtation, and potentially Harper's too. We'll get to that in a sec. But so Clement is sitting there reading a physical copy of the Financial Times newspaper, because it's pink. And Gus says, I can't believe he's actually reading a physical copy, implying like, who the hell is this dinosaur? And Robert says, and I quote, mate, he used to get twatted with Michael Lewis at Solomon. Yep. So for those of you who don't know this reference, you need to know this reference, okay? Yes. Michael Lewis, fellow Princeton grad, was an art history major, former banker, and he's now one of the most prolific and frankly best authors about stuff that sits at the intersection of finance and pop culture. He wrote Moneyball, he wrote The Big Short, he wrote Going Infinite, which we reviewed in episode 34 of the Big Podcast. It's a great read about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all that stuff. But he's probably best known, I think, for a book called Liar's Poker. And Liar's Poker is the story of the fixed income sales and trading desk at Salomon Brothers, which I think of as kind of the predecessor to Lehman in a way. They were the big bond powerhouse in the 80s and one of the first famous banks to collapse in scandal. And also, if any of you know Michael Lewis, like, please tell him we want him on the podcast.
Yeah, seriously. Yes.
But basically what Robert is saying is, this guy Clement is a legend. And Robert's got a little bit of awe about him because Robert's MO is very similar to Clement. Robert is a relationship guy, right? He's not a detail guy. Gus doesn't give two shits. He's demonstrably unimpressed. And he goes, oh, so you're saying he was a big deal in the 90s? Wow. So we know and we've known this for a while, that Gus looks down on the old school relationship-y sales guys. Robert aspires to be that. That's setting up the central tension between those two characters that's going to kind of evolve over the rest of this episode.
Yep.
So now let's come find Yasmin. We haven't talked about Yasmin yet, except the beginning. I identify with Yasmin in a lot of ways.
Well, and by the way, I want to just reiterate that the last time we saw her at the end of season 2, she was getting basically like verbally abused by her. I don't know if he's an associate or a VP. Kenny,
I think he's a VP. He's got VP energy all over him.
Yeah, so he was basically chewing her out and just being completely inappropriate at the quote unquote grad dinner. And so we're sort of coming in, and I think she's trying to just almost like clear the air, right? You're literally sitting next to this person, and she just doesn't want to have like this bad energy. And so, she's basically trying to make nice.
Yeah, she's like over communicating, right? Like, you know, when someone's giving you the silent treatment, you're like, hey, I just want you to know that I put this coffee right here. And so she's like, she literally says, I was going to send the Asia stuff to Carl at Goliath, and I wasn't sure if it was okay coming directly from me or if you wanted to be CC'd in. Basically what she's doing is saying like, hey, I really want to move on. Let's get this like analyst VP relationship back on track. I'm going to show you all the stuff I'm doing in a way that's deferential to you and shows I still respect you, even though she shouldn't, by the way, because he sucks.
Yep.
Kenny doesn't even look at her, right? He's like, yep, take the initiative, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's actually hearkening back to that conversation that Yasmin and Harper had at the end of episode 2, when Harper says, you have to take agency, right? Side note, there was some extremely vulgar off-camera dialogue at this point, which is wildly distracting, because while Yasmin's sitting there looking sad and dejected, you see the closed captions come up like, no, I'm talking about a quote-unquote thick mainline vein running down his cock is what one of the other
I missed that
says on the phone. Yes. So this is the dialogue happening on the phone in the background with the other clients that's wildly inappropriate.
By the way, so mandatory closed caption when you watch this show.
You will get so much more out of the show if you watch it on closed caption. I have to because I'm old and seen.
Yes. I've watched everything on closed caption since I was 20 years old. So like for me, the closed caption, that's always been, because this is my thing. I've always said this. I process everything better if there are words. Like I need the words. The words are like 50% of how I am learning and taking things in, which is wild because I go like listen to podcasts while I'm walking around and I do learn stuff. But it's different when you have words. Words are everything. And by the way,
words over pictures. Best way to learn.
Well, yes, pictures, words, and then also like visual. Yeah,
you need we need a smell. If we're going to put out our course, it needs to come with a fragrance.
I do actually talk. I actually in the course talk about how in this like 110K, there's this like spice company, and they actually scented their 10K or their annual report every single year. So we talk about
them. That's very cute.
Seriously. Anyway.
Okay, but so Yasmin's really stressed out because she's like, okay, my VP is just going to ignore me. She literally volunteers to be hazed again. She says, hey, we haven't done Yasmin's trading idea in a while, referencing back to that hazing ritual he submitted her to in episode 2. She's literally volunteering to be hazed to try to knit the desk back together. And Kenny says, look, I should apologize. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank God. He's going to apologize for his behavior and really clear the air. No, he doesn't apologize for blowing up the dinner. He says, I shouldn't have put you through the trade idea hazing ritual because you're clearly not ready and no one's going to take your ideas seriously for a few years. He tells her to just
clear the
nail
air,
the small stuff.
He says at the end, good to clear the air though, but it was the most passive aggressive, like putting her down. I mean, again, I love though the writing. I love the drama. Like they capture everything so freaking well. I was just like, I feel for her.
That interaction is so plucked from my own life experiences. When your boss is mad at you and you're like trying to make nice or whatever, and they're not having it and they're icing you out. It sucks. And Kenny's doing it in such a harmful way. It is, Kenny's the worst at this point. And there's more off-camera dialogue of the same saleswoman saying, the research was fundamental. So it must be horseshit. Thanks again for wasting my time.
No, seriously, I think like we need to do something somewhere where it's literally just a whole bunch of screenshots of the off-camera dialogue.
The off-camera dialogue is 100% the best. So poor Yasmin's getting really, really, really frustrated. And she actually goes up to the gym. Unrealistic because you can't just leave the desk in the middle of the day and go up to the gym. We see Jasmine taking out all her aggression at the gym. She's going nuts on this like pull down machine. I think it's like a vertical rower or whatever. I don't know, or like a rock climb machine. I don't know exactly what it is. And then she looks over at Rob. And again, this theme of Yasmin can't have power on the desk. So she's going to exert her power where she can. And it's through sex and through the hold that she has over Robert with this flirtation. So she goes over to his treadmill and starts cranking up the speed to see how far she can push it before she breaks something, right? Obviously, both physically speaking and emotionally. So I really just wanted to show what Yasmin's emotional state is before we head to the lunch with Gus, Robert, and Clement. So go ahead.
So they go out to this lunch and the new guy now, Gus on the desk, Clement taking a little bit of an interest in them, but he basically says to them, how did you find each other, given they have these different social circles? Because again, Gus was at Eton.
Eton, to give you guys a sense, Eton is one of the most exclusive and expensive private schools in England. It's where Prince William and Prince Harry
that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Robert, where did he say that he went to school? Like it was
Clement calls Robert a lad from the pit. And he actually says, how do you expect to sell financial products if you sound like a minor? However, when Gus turns it around on Clement and says, well, where did you go to school? He totally changes the subject and he points to a photo behind him on the wall and says, oh, look, there's me with some like famous British politician or something like that. And starts telling all these stories from the good old days. One from like the crash of 92, one from 1929. He's like, oh, they wallpapered the Union Club with stock certificates. Okay. That's Clement's pedigree. And by the way, this is so completely accurate. All the old school sales guys I worked with on the trading floor, their like pride and joy was having their picture up on the wall at the Palm or at Bobby Vans. Like that totally tracks. Their pedigree wasn't the Target school they went to, but which bar has their photo on the wall. So like that is 100% accurate.
Well, one of the things that they do, because there's going to be another dinner later with the client that he's going to talk about. But like basically there's a theme though that comes back where Robert clearly has almost like this imposter syndrome. They come over with some wine and the waiter's going to pour. And Gus says, no, I'm okay. And then they pour the wine into Robert's glass. And then they go over to Clement and Clement's like, no, I don't want any. So now like Robert's sitting there awkwardly because like you never want to be the only one drinking.
The only one drinking,
You never want to do that. And as they're sitting there talking, Clement says to him, you haven't taken a sip of your drink. And Robert's kind of like, okay. Like again, that's one of those things that you always feel for people. Again, it's like, if you go to dinner or lunch and you get a glass of wine and the other person doesn't, you're just like, okay, well, I feel super awkward right now. So like, and that comes up later again when they're out with Usman later in the episode, which we're going to get to in a minute.
So Clement gives them their first assignment, which is to find a way to occupy Usman, meaning basically build a relationship with the new guy. And he says, get on the right side of Usman and you'll be on the right side of me. Clement now excuses himself to pay Mrs. Winslow. Now, I didn't get that reference and I had to look it up. Did you know what that meant?
I didn't. I had a feeling it might have been a euphemism for something because we know that he's an addict later, but like I wasn't sure.
Later, but you don't know that now.
No. Yeah.
So
I only know because
like,
it's the second time watching
British
this
slang
season.
for like going to the bathroom? Like who's Mrs. Winslow? Okay, so I looked this up and I quote, Mrs. Winslow's was a patent medicine first introduced in the 19th century and marketed to calm small children, clean teeth, freshen breath, and relieve constipation. Its colorful advertising, including trading cards and calendars, showed happy, peaceful babies cradled by beautiful new mothers. Unknown to parents, each bottle contained a dangerous amount of morphine and alcohol. Some infants who consumed Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup went to sleep and never woke up.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't hear.
So this is some awful reference to morphine that was given to children. And so it is not code for going to the bathroom. But yeah, I missed that the first time through and actually like had to pause and be like, okay, what does this actually mean? Because to your point, he does say it in another episode. And so Gus, our ever diligent banker, immediately starts researching Usman, finds out he's not just an execution guy, finds out he's a junior portfolio manager. And he goes, hey, Robert, like, what's this fund's mandate? Like, I want to reach out. I want to start a conversation. And Robert just kind of looks at him blankly. Like, Gus is totally shocked that Robert knows basically nothing about Clement's only client.
Well, he says that. He says, mate, he's Clement's only client. Are you trying to not impress your boss? You have Robert, and then you also have Yasmin that both kind of just feel like, I don't want to say nothing is going right. Like they can't do anything right. And here you have Robert, where now it's Gus, his roommate, his friend, who's essentially berating him a little bit and making him feel he just had the weird situation with the wine. Now he's basically being made to feel less than because like he doesn't know this basic thing. And so and it keeps coming back up.
Well, I can relate to Robert a little bit because you don't have a lot of perspective as a junior person coming in on what these clients actually do because no one teaches this stuff in school. And it's very rare that your senior managers will give you this information in a way that's understandable. And by the way, it's like, oh, just go read their materials. You look this stuff online and it's like a bunch of super high level jargon. It's like, we seek asymmetric upside in the public markets. What the fuck does that actually mean? Okay. How much leverage can you employ? What's in your portfolio? What are your trade horizons? Blah, 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 blah. Small plug for our course that will be coming out where we are going to explain what all the different clients do. But anyways, neither here nor there. But so we know that Gus is going to research this stuff. And Robert has no idea and is already on his back foot, like you said, relative to now the other analyst who's come in to, it seems, kind of compete with him for Clement's grace and affection, right, as the senior manager.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about romance for a sec. Let's take a quick break from all of our clients. We've got Greg, the, again, VP, ED, who knows what he is. Everyone looks very young, by the way.
I know. He's like, he keeps saying, I'm old as fuck. And I'm like, you look like you're 12. I mean,
thought he was a first-year analyst at first. I didn't realize he was more senior on the desk. So, like, good for everyone's skincare, I suppose. So Greg has a little crush on Harper. So he comes over and starts chatting her up. And he's like, hey, I'm coming over for dinner with you and Yasmin. And while he's sitting there, Yasmin sends Harper a Bloomberg chat that pops up saying, Greg really likes you. I think he really likes you. Something like that, right?
He wants to do you. Something like that. It was a little more explicit than just he likes you. But yeah.
And so let me just say this, okay? 2 small notes. 1, if Harper and Yasmin are like actually becoming friends, they'd have a perma chat open. She wouldn't need to send her a new Bloomberg chat thing to open something up. We've had my friend Susie on the podcast before. We used to have a perma chat up. Like, your friends on the desk, even on other desks, you've got a permit chat up with. So like maybe this speaks to the friends, the fact that they aren't really friends and they aren't talking all day, right? So that's actually like potentially a meaningful detail here. And then 2, Greg sees this and he goes, someone should tell her they monitor these. Guys, back in our day, intra-office relationships were taboo, but not necessarily like an explicitly fireable offense. They were very, very commonplace. For those of you who don't know,
most people marry people that they met. Jen married her trader, and I married someone who we overlapped at Morgan Stanley. The irony is I didn't meet him until later, but I've told the story how I used to sit across from my brother. And then when I moved to banking, my husband ended up joining my brother's desk. But like, it's really common for people who are in the industry to end up dating and marrying someone who they worked with. But you're going to say now it's not the same.
It's not unwritten rules anymore or like, let's evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Things like this have to be locked down, I mean, immediately, okay? Any intra-office relationship has to be immediately disclosed to like 10 layers of management. You can't just be like, ooh, this guy on the other desk likes you, okay? Like,
I know.
Listen, we can, and we should, I think, talk about like whom that's helping, whom that's hurting. Some of the best intentioned policies ultimately, and it's funny because I have a friend who just started watching the show because she listens to our podcast, and she was like, dude, there's so much sex in this show. I thought people were having less sex today. And it's like, they are because of policies like this.
Right. That was exactly what I was going to say. Because it's one of these things where you're spending so much time at the office and you have this analyst class full of people who are your exact age going through the exact experience that you're going through in the same kind of like walk of life, same schedule, who are in general tend to be attractive. This is how you meet your future partners. And I also know a lot of situations where I had a friend who was like sleeping with a married MD. She was a first year analyst. There is a power dynamic that is problematic there. But especially within the analyst class, like that, in my opinion, that should not be frowned upon. Like, this is how you are meeting your future spouses. I think it's actually very sad that there's these like crazy rules that you can't date someone. I don't know. Because again, where else are you meeting these people?
You're so right on so many fronts. I think that the thing that makes this unique relative to other industries is there are millions of dollars on the line if any one of these relationships potentially sours, not just in terms of lawsuits, but in terms of conflicts of interest within the firm. And so that's where it gets beyond. The stakes are so high. So we can talk about interactions that I had over the years that were problematic on a number of fronts. But like, full disclosure, I don't pretend to be innocent. I dated my coworkers. I dated my clients. This was before dating apps. Where else was I going to meet people, to your point? Because I'm in the office all day, every day. I do see where problems arise and have arisen. And I've seen things go really, really bad. I'm not sure saying no one can date is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, most people I know ended up with someone that they worked with at some point. So I think it's sad. I think people need companionship. I think people need to like meet other people. I don't know. Whatever. I feel strongly that this is a damaging policy, that you're not letting people date. I think if you are someone superior, I think that that should not be allowed. But if you are the same freaking level and there's not a power issue, I mean, I don't know. I think that it's hurting people to be like, you can't date someone who is literally your same level.
Yeah, I just think the question of the power issue isn't as cut and dry as who's your superior and who's your inferior.
That's fair. But I do think, to your point, there are a lot of people who are having less sex, who are not getting married as much, who are depressed. And I do think that who are depressed.
And lonely.
And I think that, And I think that it was almost like the unintended consequence of well-meaning policies like these that are hurting people who are younger, who are
I do
20s,
agree with that.
Whatever.
And by the way, the sex that's shown in this episode is all like awful. Harper meets some random guy on Hinge. We'll talk about how that happens. And it's like, oh, this is how people are hooking up these days. She's like, how fast can we get out of this 5-minute bar conversation? And then it's Gus and Theo, who have an extremely problematic relationship themselves too. There's no like happy romance in the show.
No.
It's an HBO show, so we know not to expect that. Okay, we'll come back to romance a little bit later. Let's talk back to Harper now and her project. So back on the desk, Daria shows up, and I talked about this in the first episode. She talks about how gross the bathrooms are. I told you, okay?
Yep.
So she gives Harper a project. She asks her to look up data on a particular client, specifically how often they've been trading, what volume, which asset class over the past 3 years. That's a good little project, by the way, for an analyst to do. I am starting to like Daria more and more. And then she says, I'll bring you to the meeting with this client, basically as a reward. Like this woman has gone from first episode being portrayed like a little toxic, I think, to now way better. Like I'm a buyer of Daria from here on. Okay.
Yeah.
And so she asks Harper too, like, hey, do you think you can have this ready for me by the end of the day? And she's like, if you can't, let me know and I'll work it out. That is so gracious and kind. And by the way, your MDs in investment banking who are giving you all the projects, like the specific project, there's no, if you can't get it to me by the end of the day, we'll work it out. It's due. And I don't care what else you have going on in your life.
Well, this is back to the conversation we had last week where people need to stop seeing working 100-hour weeks as a badge of honor. And we saw how Hari was like, give me that model. Like I wanted to get work. So I think that there's a little bit of that where some people won't push back when they should because they think it will hurt them. But most of the time you will tend to be asked, like the staffer will ask, do you have capacity? Like what else are you working on? What else is like due right now? Because by the way, the other thing with the banking projects is usually you get staffed on a project that's long-term. So what are the things that you have on your plate? Because some of the projects will be in like quiet and others will be like really ramping up. But again, sometimes people won't say that they don't have the capacity, and that's where it becomes a problem. And I actually think, again, in this particular case, Harper probably should have said, hey, this is the other stuff that I have working on.
No, disagree. So you are given projects so infrequently in sales and trading. Nothing is project-based. Everything is very up to the moment. So she's working on a trade idea for Eric, and she's been given this one project for Daria. The only thing standing in the way of her completing these things is the fact that she's fucking around on her phone with Robert about her Hinge profile and the dinner she has that night.
Agreed. But my point was less about the fact that she's not going to do it, but I think just giving her a sense of this is what I have on my plate, mostly because, again, Daria just wants this thing done. And so the problem is, in my opinion here, that Harper is saying, hey, I can do it. And then Daria has an expectation of the timing. And then when she's asking about it, like she comes back later, she hasn't done anything. Like, I mean, as the person who has been Daria before, you're like, I just need to know because I need to either do it myself, and I can do it myself. I don't mind doing it myself. I'm trying to give you this project because I'm trying to help you. So either get it done, but don't say yes and then just not do it, or don't say yes and don't communicate about the timing of when you can expect to get it done. So that was why I thought that she should have said something along the lines of like, yes, I'm working on this trade pitch for whatever, the due date is this, but I will get this done. I'm going to prioritize it. Is this the time you need it? Like, you need to just be overly communicative, because the lack of communication, just saying yes and then not doing it, is a huge fucking problem. Like, so, and that obviously is what we see.
And I totally agree with that. However, what's a key thing here is Daria has given her a specific due date for this project, which is end of day today. Yeah. Eric has not. Eric said, yeah, go work on this trade idea. So she bumps Eric, thinking, well, he didn't give me a specific due date. Daria has urgency about this, so I'm going to bump Eric.
Yeah.
So Eric comes over and again catches her looking at Hinge profiles. So in our romance theme, we'll come to this in a bit, but Robert has set up Hinge profiles for Harper. He catches her literally on her phone, like looking at this stuff. And he goes, hey, how's my trade idea coming? And this is at the end of the day.
And everyone is gone. By the way, the janitors are in there. And that's always like the saddest thing when you're on the trading floor and you're staying late. That happened to me a lot because I was like in the groups that we tended to work later hours. They're more project based. And like the janitors are like there. Nobody else is on the desk anymore. It's just like this like sad, depressing. And so I wanted to set that stage that it is late and she has a lot of stuff that she needs to get done.
And she's messing around.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
And
like she went out in the middle of the day to buy lilies.
Yeah, exactly. So Eric asks her, like, where's my trade idea? And she starts fumbling around. She's like, I'm thinking we express the view via the homebuilders sub index. He's looking over her shoulder being like, is this all you've done?
Yeah.
And she says, and I quote, I didn't know you were expecting it done by the end of the day. And he says, I expect you to have expectations of yourself. So again, this is the difference between him and Daria as managers. And this is also a sales and trading versus a project-based thing. The fact that Daria even gave her a deadline and it wasn't just assumed ASAP, by the way, in sales and trading, it's assumed ASAP. You say you're going to get something done. There's no like, when I have time, when I have capacity. It's just a very different, there is a sense of urgency about everything. Everything is treated with a sense of urgency. If it's not important, she would have said, get to this when you get to it. It's not important. And even so, the turnaround on it's not important should be about 2 days. So like, the expectation is that you're going to push yourself hard for excellence all day, every day. And Harper is not acting with that sense of urgency. And that's what Eric is trying to get out of her.
Well, there's also then this tension between Eric and Daria. And like, there's the power struggle. He says, you need to pitch this idea in the morning. He's like, I want the version of the trade idea that I asked for, and you need to do it in front of the whole team. And Harper says, is this punishment? And he says, or an opportunity. But then he says, don't make me feel like I'm not special, right? And so there is this dynamic where I do think he feels a little bit like he has taken her under his wing. And I think that he has this feeling like she should be prioritizing him over everyone else always. And then you do see this later. It becomes tension with, and we're going to get to this later, when like she needs to go in to that client meeting that Daria is bringing her to because she's doing this work for her, and Eric has his own agenda. And again, there's that tension between Daria and Eric that is going to start playing out. But I do think there's a little bit of possessiveness with Eric, that he feels like, this is my analyst. I am doing all this stuff for her. She should be making me top priority over this VP. So I think there's a little bit of that too.
I think it was shitty of Harper to even come up with an excuse. Oh, I was working on something else for Daria. Harper's not being a model analyst here. You don't make excuses. Oh, I was doing something for someone else. And the fact that she thought it was a punishment shows that she's got this twisted. Being asked to do things by your manager in sales and trading is not a punishment. The punishment is what Yasmin gets. It's you're not qualified to do anything. That's the real punishment. When Kenny says no 100%. One's going to listen to you. He has
for
told
2
her
years
to get up and pitch an idea in front of the sales meeting. That is such a fucking gift, okay? So for her to think this is, so I agree with you that, and I definitely it does emerge later that there is a power struggle then between Eric and Daria. I didn't see it in this scene. I can see how it's there as an undercurrent.
Oh, see, I love how we both like interpret things differently. Like, because with like even last week, the different interpretations of the comment that Yasmin made to Kenny, and I was like, oh no, I totally took it this way. And you're like, oh, I didn't.
I agree that is a thing, but I didn't think it was above Daria specifically. It's above your fucking dinner, your stupid texts. It's above all that stuff.
Yeah,
and this isn't a punishment.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. It was just, again, in my watching of it, I took a different,
I love that
like,
added
view.
wrinkle that it is partially about Daria too. And I think you're correct.
Yeah.
And so, by the way, the second he walks out, Harper starts looking at her phone again. It's pinging, and Yasmin's like, "Where are you coming to this dinner? This dinner's literally for you." And to Harper's credit, at least she ignores it and goes back to work. Now, it would have been perfectly reasonable if she'd just been like, "I'm so sorry. I'm tied up on something." It's fairly unusual in sales and trading that you get held at the office late about something, but it isn't unusual that you have to cancel plans with friends all the time. Like I've said, if I can't count the number of times that I canceled any kind of personal social plans because it was like, this client wants to meet up, then we got to go with this client tonight. Like, oh, I didn't tell you we've got the dinner tonight, like whatever it is.
Yeah. Like, she literally hops in an Uber and is working on the deck, working on this analysis for Daria, getting texts again from Yasmin, who's she's not there, getting texts from Daria asking if it's done, right? And for me, it felt like it summed up a lot of things that was much more banking like feeling, where it's you're canceling plans on your friends, you're late with something that's due for work, you have multiple things, like when it rains it pours, right? There's when one thing happens and one thing's due, it's like everything's due. So it definitely felt very accurate there. But I also was like, why are you leaving to go to this dinner? Like, you should have canceled, you shouldn't have got, anyway, I would like, that's the difference, is like, again, in banking, you don't go to the dinner. Like, she goes to the dinner.
No, but you don't go to the dinner in sales and trading either. You do not go to your personal commitments when a work commitment comes up as a junior person. You don't. You don't. Yeah. And if that boundary, like if that's too little boundaries for you, that's not the right job for you. It's just not.
Right.
And it's not, you have to work 3 nights and stay up all night, by the way. Had she had better time management and treated this like the opportunity it was, and 100%. Not the chore 100%. That she has made it into, she would have been fine.
Yes, 100%.
So Harper continues to be not my favorite analyst. Okay, so let's cut back to Robert, Gus, and Theo. They're all in Robert and Gus's apartment. Robert's sitting there with his sad little like microwave dinner, finally with the fund prospectus out in front of him reading. But he's got that open. He's on his phone and he's like, hey, did you see that like our friend from Eton has like started a new like gay nightclub, right? So the only actual research that Robert is doing is about the partying scene, which totally tracks for Robert. Like, we've established that already. And Robert's like, hey, Gus and Theo, who are lovers, why don't we all go to this gay club together? And Theo is basically like, I'm not hanging out with you guys in public. I'm out of here. And Robert starts to give Gus shit about how poorly this guy is treating him. But instead of being like, you're right, this is a toxic relationship, Gus turns it around on Robert and is like, you haven't done the basic legwork on researching this client. Not only did I read that prospectus, but I've already got a chat going with Usman, right?
I'm working on a pitch
with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
With Theo,
by the way.
Theo.
My little research boyfriend. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, one point that we should make about the deck that Harper's working on in the car, I actually did a screenshot of it. And so what she's doing there, you can see she lists out the sales credits that Daria had asked for from that client over the past couple of years. And it says FICC sales credits, FICC or FIC. Yeah, that's typically the acronym for fixed income currencies and commodities. That's what we all just lump together as fixed income sales, trading, and research. So you see she has 3.2 million in 2017, 1.9 million in 2018, 4.1 million in 2019, and 1.625 million in 2020 year to date. Remember, were these hard dollars, right? Daria is making bank. No, these are not hard dollars. A good VP in a seat like this is probably making between 500 and 800K. Actually, wait, I'm wrong. She's not a VP. We find out later that she is more senior than that because Eric's like, if you want to make MD early. So maybe she's an executive director or a director or an SVP.
I still think she's a VP, but maybe she's an SVP and they have different levels.
SVP is another word for the tier between VP.
Yeah, for the executive directors. Which
is executive director.
For some reason, I feel like I saw somewhere she was a VP, but I also,
If
Again,
then that's wrong. She wouldn't go directly from VP.
Right.
I thought she was a VP too. So yeah, maybe that's a slight error on behalf of the show. You don't go from VP to MD. There's a level in between. So at some banks, 2 levels, but typically it's 1, and it's either called executive director, senior vice president, executive vice president. It's a whole bunch of garbage names, and that's another tier higher in compensation.
Just so that the actual vice president of the firm doesn't feel special. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. And so at this dinner that Harper chooses to go to, there's a great exchange between Yasmin's gross boyfriend, Seb, and Greg, the guy who's interested in Harper.
Hold on. When they show up, I actually have to call this out because the Seb and his little brother they have some kind of startup. They basically say, we're launching sub-sites for Brown, Princeton, and Harvard. So I was like, I love that they actually included Brown. I would have thought they'd be like Yale, Princeton, Harvard. No, they included Brown. And we were friends, of course.
Of course they included Brown. Again, we have a very Brown-heavy podcast. But so Greg goes, dumb question. How do you make money? Because seeing someone make money doing something they love brings me great pain. And the actually hilarious part is Seb goes, just traditional revenue streams, really, things like targeted advertising. The joke here is that investment banks have traditional revenue streams. Seb works in the relatively new world of tech, and it's like journalism tech or something like that, where things like targeted advertising through algorithms, those weren't a thing 10 or 15 years ago, okay? Yet tech has become now the de facto assumed career path for young people. And so it's like, ew, weird. How do bankers make money, right? Like,
yeah.
So like I said earlier, I do want to flash back to a conversation that Robert and Harper have. When Harper was getting those flowers that you were talking about, she runs into Robert and he goes, are those for Greg, right? Like the guy who now she's being set up at this dinner. He starts teasing her about her and Greg potentially getting together. He tries to get her on the dating apps and he decides that he's going to set up a Hinge profile for her. But so what Harper says is the only guys I match with are Chads who are into biracial chicks. Well, Robert shows her his phone and he's got multiple dating profiles, which I guess is a thing that men do, which sounds super gross and terrible. But he goes, look, I've got one that kind of looks like a wealthy banker. And that matches every day with millions of girls called Portia who work in PR. And another one who's like a hard partier who matches with artsy types. And Harper's like, this screams insecurity. I think it's actually more than just insecurity, although I do think it's insecurity. And I also think that this speaks to like the deplorable state of dating that we were just talking about. But Robert is showing that he doesn't care. He will be whatever it is that someone wants him to be.
Yeah.
Like he can be the polished banker. He can be the drug-addled, hard partying dude just to get whatever he wants and to get people to like him. And it actually made me think of that conversation we had with Jamie Patton where she said, okay, if an interviewer asks what type of salesperson are you, or like a research salesperson, a technical salesperson, like a relationship salesperson, the correct answer is whatever the client wants me to be.
Right.
So I actually think that that's interesting because that's Robert.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
He will be whatever it is that people want him to be if it gets him where he's trying to go.
Whatever the client wants, he's going to do.
That's exactly right. Okay. So now we're at this dinner and Harper, instead of paying any attention to Greg, is kind of scrolling through her phone at all the text messages coming from Robert about the Hinge profiles that he's setting up for her. And she seems like super excited to get his little texts and kind of like flirty writing back. Harper says, A, I'm texting Rob, and then follows up with telling everybody that Eric wants her to pitch a trade idea in front of everyone in the morning meeting. Yasmin hears this and is like, oh, okay, that's nice. Meaning you're texting the guy that I have this flirtation with, even though I'm here with my silly boyfriend.
Yeah.
And you get this opportunity to present in front of everyone. She does seem genuinely happy for Harper and like congratulates her.
Yeah.
But it turns pretty quickly because the dinner breaks up. Yasmin is talking to Seb, her boyfriend, and Harper's like in another section of the room. I mean, they act like these people can't hear each other, whatever.
I know.
But so Yasmin is talking to her boyfriend and she's like, you know, hey, like, am I being paranoid? Or like, is Harper's whole pitch about the housing market really just to dig at my family? Because Harper says non-dom tax aisles buying up properties is part of the weakness in the housing market, or one of the things that's going to cause the housing market to collapse, I suppose. Now, this is an off-screen conversation that we are never privy to, but it's summarized here. So suggesting that Yasmin's parents are foreigners, that they've bought up all this real estate, that they're wealthy, and that they're fleeing taxation in other places or fleeing taxation within London. Seb, to his credit, says, like, you invited her to live here. You can't start doing this, right? You can't start being this like jealous, petty, whatever. We should make her feel comfortable because like all this wealth, it's probably a bit of a culture shock to Harper. And Yasmin is like, all I'm doing is making this woman feel comfortable, okay? Because she thinks she's a saint for letting Harper stay there. And Harper's getting all the things that Yasmin wants. And Yasmin's been brought up her whole life being told how perfect she is. If you remember that first dinner where we're introduced to her mom.
She's perfect.
But she was the perfect child who wet the bed until she was 9. So every time there's praise, it's laced with this like infantilization of her. It's, oh, no one's going to take your ideas seriously. You're a princess. And by the way, being so frustrated about Harper's success, Yasmin, of course, tries to make a move on Seb and gets rejected. So she's like, okay, I want power, sex. And he's like, no interest, right? Harper rejects Greg, and we move on to the next day. Okay, so it's the next morning, and it is finally Harper's turn to do this trade pitch. She's pitching a hedge on the housing market. So in layman's terms, what that means is she thinks that real estate looks rich or it's overvalued and should correct and come down. Now, remember, in the public markets, if you want to make plays on the housing market, there's a number of ways to do it, but you can't be direct. You can't just go buy and sell houses, right? Like that's for real estate investors to do. There's nothing that's that direct exposure in the markets. You can trade mortgages. You can trade the stocks of home builders. You can trade the bonds or the CDS of those publicly traded home builder companies or privately traded ones, whatever. There's all kinds of things that you can do, but they're kind of 1 degree removed from the houses. So Harper starts in talking about housing weakening, and Theo immediately jumps in and he's like, well, if you're trying to draw an analogy to the 07-08 crisis, which we all know, by the way, from the first episode that Theo had just written a whole research paper about that Clement was like, don't have time for this, don't care, right? He's like, that's not going to work, okay? And the reasons that he cites are less overbuilding, less borrowing against existing home values. And he's totally correct, okay? That like the structural issues that caused the 08 collapse were simply not present in 2009. Like you said, right? These were totally different dynamics than we have now and than we had in 2008. Yeah. And so she's like, okay, well, don't you think home builder stocks are looking a little toppy? So meaning, well, I want to express the view that housing might soften in a somewhat indirect way, that these particular publicly traded companies that build homes or manage properties or whatever it is, that they look a little rich. And he goes, well, that's not the house view, meaning that's not the view of the firm through research and strategy who publishes the quote unquote house view. Yeah. And she says, well, the house view is consensual, meaning not consensual, like it's with an S, right? Meaning that it's currently all priced into the market. There's no massive upside like opportunity consensus by holding that consensus view. Exactly. Yeah. And Eric backs her up and he says, counter consensus is where we live, right? The money making opportunities lie in what's not priced in and going after that. So she says, all right, initially I was thinking some puts on the S&P. For those of you who are not familiar with puts are the right, but not the obligation to sell something. So I think the S&P was probably trading around like 3,000 at the time. So if you want to buy a put on the S&P, you might buy a put struck at, 2,900 at expiry.
By the way, in hindsight, this is like the worst trade of all time.
Worst trade ever. Yeah, don't do this
like she couldn't have gotten it more wrong, but
don't do this trade in. Well, to be fair, puts on the S&P at a certain point were a great trade.
That's actually true. That's actually true. It could have been a great trade just for the wrong reason.
Yeah, exactly, for a hot minute. True. But so the way that trade makes you money is if at expiry, the S&P has fallen through the strike price and then enough beyond that to cover the money you spent on that option, you make money. Or by holding that put option as you approach expiry, if S&Ps are going down, the delta of that option, if S&Ps are going down, that option is going to go up in value, assuming you haven't lost enough to time decay to offset that, whatever. Okay. Now she adds a wrinkle. She says, linked to calls on gold. Okay, now I'm interested. Right? So a call option is the opposite of the put, right? It's the right, but not the obligation to buy something. So why do you want to buy gold and sell stocks? Well, gold is typically pretty well correlated with S&Ps during risk on periods, meaning when people are like, buy everything, right? Sentiment's good, like just buy everything. And that makes sense because when people are buying everything, prices tend to go up. That's inflationary. And remember, we talked about gold being a hedge for inflation. But Harper thinks things are going to go bad, meaning stocks are going to go down in response to weakness in housing. So she wants to sell that correlation because she thinks S&Ps are going to go down while gold's going to go up. Now, I think the reality, by the way, is that in the post-2008 world, these cycles happen so much faster that it's like, okay, there's weakness somewhere. Everyone assumes central bank policy is going to cut. Everything rebounds so quickly. There's really no time for these cycles to play out the way that they did historically, because the default assumption now is, okay, rates are going to zero. Rates are going to zero.
I mean, but you even saw what happened with Japan a couple months ago. Just everyone was unwind to carry trade. Everything's down. And it's poof, it's back up.
Everything's fine. Yeah, everything's fine. Exactly.
Whoa.
Exactly.
Got whiplash. Yeah.
And so when she proposes this idea, Theo jumps in again and he's like, why on earth are we doing all of this with the labor market going gangbusters? That really doesn't make sense. Okay. And it's true because remember that we're talking about things that are going to happen as a result of likely moves in central bank policy. And when the labor market is doing great, that's one of the two main inputs that the central banks are looking at is the health of the labor market. And so you would need to see some weakness in the labor market, some rise in unemployment to justify also cutting rates. It can't just be that the economy isn't strong if people are fully employed. So Harper finally spits out her trade idea after we've voiced all these objections. And she says it's going to be a put option on the homebuilders index, meaning a group of stocks that, maybe it includes I don't even know who the homebuilders are.
Home Depot?
Toll Brothers. I don't think so. I think it's more like the companies that build.
More the ones that are building, not the fixer-uppers. Home Depot went crazy in 2020, but
that's a good point. I don't know exactly what's included in the home builders index, but I know that it would be the builders of homes. It might also be some related equities. That's a really good point. So it's going to be a put on the home builders index, a call option on gold, and then quote unquote, as a sweet kicker, credit default swaps on home builders too. Okay, hang on. What? So we've got two elements of this trade that have the exact same risk profile effectively. They're just different parts of the capital structure. Credit default swaps are effectively insurance policies on corporate bonds. If you buy a credit default swap on one of these home builders, you benefit if the market starts to price in a higher risk that they won't pay back money that they've borrowed. Well, guess what? If they're not about to pay back money that they borrowed, their stock is probably going down too, okay? So you've got two things that are going the exact same way. And we don't have enough information on how exactly this trade is structured. Originally you had me at okay, maybe we can buy some cheap puts on the S&P or whatever linked to the price of gold. But the way that she has spit this out is you're buying a put, you're buying a call, and you're buying CDS. That's a fine portfolio, but there's nothing about this trade that makes it a cheap package for the client like she's implicated. There's no correlation trading happen. It's just buy this thing, buy that thing, and buy this other thing. So maybe you've crafted a portfolio that expresses this view, but it's not the genius trade that links it all together and incentivizes the client to do this.
The one that I used to laugh at, I think I told you that in 2008, when everyone thought the banks were going down, and they did, but what was happening was a lot of people just as the stock that the trade was basically short the stock and then buy CDS on the bonds, which basically is buying insurance on the bonds. And as someone explained it, I love this analogy. It's buying insurance on your neighbor's house and then driving the car through it,
Right.
But
which is exactly what she's recommending doing. You can do that all day long, but you've got same way risk exposure, right? And there's nothing cheap about doing that inherently and just saying it the way she said it to be structured, right?
Right.
And she acts, or the writers act, like she's come up with this brilliant way to steal from clients or trick clients into handing over their money. Because she says, we get paid no matter what plays out. Of course you do. That's your job, okay?
Right.
The firm is not gambling on the other side of these bets. The firm is facilitating these trades, charging bid and offer to do it, and then strategically hedging it, okay? So back to our McDonald's example from earlier, right? You go to McDonald's and you buy your Big Mac and your fries and your soda. McDonald's gets paid whether you feel great after eating that meal or not. Okay, they don't care. So it shows a fundamental lack of understanding. Like, this isn't like, oh, gotcha. It's like, yes, you will continue to operate and do business and charge for doing that business if clients decide to put on this risk exposure. Once again, when talking about these trades, I feel like the writers of the show got so close. They were like, ooh, cross-asset trades. This is this really juicy stuff that these firms can do. But like, no, she's just come up with like a cross-asset portfolio of trades, but not an actual cross-asset trade. Does that make sense? Like an individual thing.
I don't know how in the weeds some of the writers got. They clearly understand like so much more than any other show out there. I don't think that this particular trade was crafted. I think it was like, we want to show her throwing a lot of products at things, using these big words. Nobody's going to understand it. Like, nobody's going to sit and do like what you just did, right? Like, what we're crazy enough to do. So I think there's maybe like 2 people who are watching the show like, does this trade idea make sense? Most people are just like, they're trying to sell a lot of stuff that they're going to get a lot more bid offer on, and they're going to be able to make more money if they're able to sell this versus some more vanilla product. And so I think that was the genesis of this trade idea. There are a lot of stuff at it.
Said, and I totally agree. And again, it's one of those like small nuances. It's just the gotcha moment of we've packaged it all up in this really digestible way that's nice and cheap for clients. No, you didn't. All you did was tell them what the various things are they could put in their portfolio. Sounds like a small nuance. We're talking a delta of potentially millions of dollars in both sales credits and P&L to the firm between how those two things are structured. It's actually a huge difference, whether it's a structured trade or it is just a portfolio of trades that are all very vanilla things that you wouldn't be able to charge much bid offer on at all.
Makes sense.
Okay, but so this trade idea so impresses Eric, just blows him away so much that he says, to your point, I don't think Daria is being aggressive enough with this client, Aubrey, that you prepared all that information about. I want you to go pitch this brilliant cross-asset trade to Aubrey in that meeting when you get in there. And Harper smartly is like, this sounds fishy. Like, I don't want to step on any toes. Right. And he's like, Daria's the last thing you're going to be thinking about when it comes to how I think about your performance. So this is going to be good for you. This is great for your overall position if you go in there guns blazing into this meeting.
Well, and Slash, I mean, he even takes it one step further because he says, you won't care what she thinks on riff. So also being like, remember your job is on the line.
Which is ridiculous, by the way, because Daria's input does matter for riff. Like, in fact, like who's going to have the most color about your performance in your performance review? It's going to be the people more junior down the stack of seniority because they're working more closely with you day to day and know more about the deliverables that you're expected to do than an MD who's very far removed for those analyst duties. So Daria's got this big meeting scheduled with this client, Aubrey. Yasmin sits in this sales meeting and goes back to the FX desk, all fired up. She's like, hey, maybe I can try again to sound smart in front of Kenny, who hates me. So she's like, hey, Harper had this great idea in the sales meeting, and I think we should pitch it to so-and-so, and she's pitching it in front of Aubrey today at the meeting. And Kenny's like, hold the phone. Aubrey? Aubrey's in the building? I'm FX coverage for Aubrey. I had no idea he was going to be here. I feel like CPS is stealing this client from me and, bogarting him for themselves, right? So he runs over there, and instead of being
he marches right up, like all
and drags Yasmin with him. And he's like, my analyst just told me that you guys have this meeting. Totally throws her under the bus. And then he goes, Yasmin's great trade idea is what we should get in front of him. So he throws Yasmin under the bus first by saying that she's the one who ratted out CPS having this meeting. Then he throws her under the bus again by making it look like she poached and took credit for Harper's genius trade idea and is going around parroting it as her own. Harper's given Yasmin a look like, what the fuck? And Yasmin's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she's
like, I didn't do this.
Like, oh my God, I didn't do any of this, right? So they get to the point where Daria agrees to allow Yasmin to come into the meeting without Kenny, which is probably better for everyone, but everyone. So Yasmin, Daria, Harper, and Aubrey all sit down for this meeting. And Yasmin is doing great in the meeting in the initial clip that we see. They're having this conversation about Aubrey's sleep apnea, and she's like, have you tried Bikram yoga? Although Bikram yoga became quite scandalous after the sexual assault allegations. So she's being a little edgy. She's bringing up things that like toe the line. And Aubrey fires right back. He's like, oh, you know, you got a bunch of men in a room and it always leads back to the same. I mean, and Daria is smiling and like encouraging Yasmin, who's being an adept conversationalist, you know, like everyone's all Harper. And Harper like elbows her way in and she's like, Aubrey, have you thought about tail risk? Like, this is not her meeting to run. And she's basically saying, everybody shut up and stop chatting about personal stuff. Let's get down to business. Daria kind of like artfully tries to deflect. And Yasmin indicates to Harper, like, follow Daria's lead, dude. Like, she's the lead coverage in here. This isn't how this works. You need to be deferential to your seniors, right? And Harper is like, fuck you, Yasmin. This is our meeting. You're just here to observe. How dare you tell me not to pitch my idea? And Daria gives them both a look and in so many words basically tells them to shut the fuck up, okay?
Right.
I mean, bickering like this and what Harper is doing, which is trying to show up the lead coverage on the account in the meeting is, I mean, that is not a good look. I don't care how smart you think you are. You don't do shit like that. There are plenty of opportunities for you to show people how smart you are. This is not how that works.
Well, 100%. But again, her instinct was not to do this, but she also knows that Eric just told her basically like, you're not going to care what Daria thinks about you on riff. So it's like he put, I don't want to say the fear of God into her, but like she knows that she has basically one thing she's being told that she needs to do from Eric. Knows what she should be doing because she knows what the right thing to do is, which was her initial instinct of like, well, you saw it when she was uncomfortable.
She initially did. Yeah.
But then I think that like when she sits down in the meeting, I also do think there's a little bit that like she not only had what Eric had told her, but then also probably was maybe a little bit concerned that Yasmin might try to jump in and like pitch her idea because Kenny said that. So I don't know if there was maybe a little bit of that part too, where she's like, I need to do this first because this was my idea. So I think there's probably, again, like back to everything. I love that the writers just, again, do a great job here where feels like she needs to do this for multiple reasons and is also pissed at freaking Yasmin for what just happened. And now is like, I'm going to do what I've been told to do / you're not taking credit for my idea.
Right. And so Daria wrestles control of this meeting back and it fades out with her saying, hey, listen, we've got this in-house idea of being back to our trade from last week, short cable, meaning short sterling against the US dollar. So it fades out on that note of her pitching actually Yasmin's trade idea, which is apparently the consensus house view. And by the way, which was everyone's view back in 2019 and is everyone's view today because dollar sterling is at the same level. So I actually just think that's kind of hilarious. So, okay, we're going to put a pin in that cross-currency trade for just a second and come back to it. Daria leaves the meeting pissed. Eric asks Harper how the meeting went. And she didn't get to pitch the trade idea, obviously. And he's pissed. He gave her this mission. She failed in the mission. And he brings up, like, I sent you into that meeting to pitch this thing. Daria overhears all this and goes, hang on, I brought her into the meeting.
Yeah.
Daria feels super disrespected and she and Eric get into it. And he's basically implying that she's not aggressive enough in getting enough trades out of this client, that she's not monetizing that relationship. And he does say, as we discussed earlier, she's not going to make MD early if this behavior keeps up.
Right.
So then she storms off and Eric goes on his monologue as the whole trading floor suddenly silences and says, what's our budget? And everybody looks at him blankly, implying if we don't get more trades from these clients, we're not going to hit our budget. Hang on. Everyone looking at him blankly and not immediately being like, I don't know, like $250 million or whatever it is. No, you have this number tattooed on your brain every single year. Because guess what? If your budget's $100 million and the desk makes $120 million, barring some blow up elsewhere at the bank or in the markets or whatever, you know you're likely going to get a very good performance-based compensation. That thing that is misnomered as the bonus, right? And so we haven't discussed it on this podcast before, but I want to just quickly say that the way you are
Jen feels very strongly about the word bonus.
The word bonus is like responsible for more bad press and bad sentiment towards the entire financial services industry than I think anything else, because you think it's like Chevy Chase's Christmas bonus, right? And National Lampoon's Vacation. Like, oh, your boss is
The
feeling
bankers
nice.
get these big bonuses.
Yeah. It is performance-based compensation. You have a fixed, relatively low portion of your salary that is effectively guaranteed each year unless you get fired with cause. On top of that, the majority of your compensation is variable, and it is based on the performance of you as an individual, the desk that you're on, the division that you're in, and finally the bank as a whole. It is a function of all of those things. And that can be zero, okay? You can get a donut, and that's very, very, very bad, but that happens a lot when either the firm does very badly, you do very badly. There are consequences for when things go badly. So everyone's like, huge investment banking bonuses when everybody had a bad year. It's like, that's not accurate, okay?
Yeah.
So that bonus, that performance-based compensation, typically falls within standardized kind of bands at the junior levels. That's pretty consistent across most firms. But then as you start to get more senior, the field widens out, right? And your bonus could be anywhere from $200,000 to $2 million, depending on who you are and what desk or more. And so all of that is dependent on whether or not your desk hits its budget. That is a huge factor that comes into play. So if your budget is $100 million and you only make 60, even if that $100 million wasn't a fair number in the beginning, that's political ammo that people within the bank have to say, well, you shouldn't get a big bonus. That should go to my desk. So it's all a political nightmare. Everybody knows the goddamn budget. Okay. Like that's not a mystery. You are thinking about that number every single day, especially as a trader.
Which means Eric is like, he's like, I go to bed thinking about that number. I wake up thinking about that number. And everyone else is like, I don't know what number it is.
Okay, well
Jen's
then Eric's
like,
the only one who deserves to get paid at the end of the year because he's thinking about the things that are going to get him paid. Hey, Kristen, you look a little different.
So we had to take a little break from recording because we'd only been recording for an hour and 40 minutes and we're not yet finished with one episode. So
are we like halfway through this episode?
So I had to go get my hair done in the middle. Now we're back. So anyone who's watching on YouTube, we are back. We had to finish this because this needs to go out.
I can now sit squarely at my desk because the sun isn't blinding me because we tried to do this first thing in the morning, which isn't our normal recording time.
No, yeah. So anyway, so we are back now. And when we left off, we were talking about how Eric got super pissed off because he wanted Harper in the meeting pitching this product that would bring revenue into the firm and doesn't feel like Daria is aggressive enough in basically making money. And he says something which is interesting. He's like, what's our budget? Blah, blah. We talked about that. But he then says, we owe our clients nothing. We aren't fiduciaries. We are advisors and facilitators. And basically the job of the salesperson from his perspective is to make money and bring it into the firm. And that kind of speaks to something that, Jen, I know you've talked about before, which is like the salespeople are in a unique position because they do need to be doing what's right for the client, but at the same time, their goal is to make money for the firm. And like those are kind of two opposing things where it's like Daria seems like she actually does have she wants to do what's best for her client. Like she knows what they want, she knows what they need, and she's trying to facilitate that. And Eric's perspective is like, bring the money in. It's like two different sides of sort of the job of the salesperson, and they're taking two different perspectives on it. And obviously that sort of blew up. So
yeah, no, I think that's really that analysis is super on point. And as an extension of that, after he finishes that little speech, he tells Harper to aggressively pitch this client.
Yeah.
And says if he doesn't trade with you, basically put him in the box, right? Withdraw all market commentary, withdraw research. He's not getting any more information from the firm, which like you said, that's not client first mentality, right? That's not sales mentality. If anything, that's trading mentality. You'd hear that from the traders.
Yeah. And to that point, so then she's basically calling up this guy, Aubrey, and she's trying to pitch this trade idea. And she's like, it's like calls and puts and CDS all packaged in this cheap suite. And Aubrey basically is like, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't trade products I don't understand. And she's like, well, you don't need to understand the products. You just need to understand the payout. And his response was, well, from tulips to CDOs, newness has always been a dangerous sign. And so I actually thought that was really interesting because again, this whole idea of a client basically saying, and this is probably why Daria was like, we're not pitching this. Like, I know this client, he's not going to do it. And so for her to sit there.
The newness there he's referencing specifically is CDS. He's saying this is a new product that I don't understand. CDS has been around since like 1994. The market size was tens of trillions of dollars during the 07-08 financial crisis. It is bread and butter for the industry. So that's fine if it's not part of your mandate or
Right.
you think that CDS looks expensive right now and you don't want to buy it. Those are all normal things for someone taking risk at a hedge fund to say. For them to say, I don't understand how CDS works and it's so new, it's just a bubble and a craze, like the Dutch tulip craze is, well, which honestly makes me think, I'm like, well, this guy isn't qualified to be executing a single trade, which well, that's part of the problem that ensues.
Yeah. I mean, and so it's interesting because I do think like post the whole great financial crisis, people saw CDS as not weapons of mass destruction, but like these little products that took down the whole economy. But to your point, A, they've been around forever. B, same thing with CDOs. Like CDOs literally are just pooling together different bonds. The whole idea is that like when you have a lot of different assets, if one goes bad, it's okay because you spread your risk out. By buying the whole thing, buying a bunch of different things, you're lowering your risk. So it's not something that's new. It's the same idea as mortgage-backed securities. Like these are all kind of the same thing. I think what he's saying does make sense. Like it's probably a good idea not to buy stuff if you don't understand it.
Sure.
And I think that's reasonable. But again, like to call these new, I mean, that's not.
To be honest, it sounds like the showrunners were like, we don't get how this stuff works. We
that's
don't
fair.
We can do up down. So let's show something that's up down, and we can do an FX trade. Right?
And to be fair, as we talked about earlier, we were like, we don't understand exactly what Harper has done and how this is actually. So I feel like they.
I have more questions than answers about the trade that ensues after this conversation.
Well, and so let's talk about that. So then as soon as he basically says no, I think she was sitting there like, all right, well, I've got to get him to do something with me. Like Eric is pissed off. We need to bring money into this firm. At the end of the meeting.
And Eric is over there, by the way, distracting Daria. He's literally running interference with the same goddamn fan of paint colors, being like, we're renovating my den. I thought it was going to be green. Which green do you like? Doing the same shit that he did to demean Gus at the beginning of the episode, now to Daria after he's put her in her place.
Yes. And so she wants to execute this trade. She wants to get something. So she basically says that sterling, what is it called? The cable trade?
She goes, what about that dollar sterling idea, the cable trade that Daria pitched you?
And so he says, and actually, I'm going to have you get these specifics because I feel like, did he say yards and stuff? Like he said words that I was like,
here's exactly what happened. And I freeze framed the screen multiple times. So maybe we can try to embed that in a YouTube video, although that sounds super ambitious. So he says, okay, that's simple enough. That I understand, right? Dollar sterling. We talked about that FX trade in our last episodes. If you need a refresher, go back and listen to that. So he says, make me a price in $50. So the minimum unit for institutional size is $1 million. So that's $50 million worth of sterling. GBP is the acronym for that. Great British pound, and USD, US dollar. Okay. So he says, make me a price. Since the trade was to short cable, meaning sell sterling versus dollar, she could just say, okay, well, it's bid here. But she makes them a two-way market, which is fine. A lot of people want two-way markets, like just so they know, okay, how wide is bid offer? How much am I being charged effectively to do this trade? So she pulls up a little screen. On that screen, it says GBP USD. On the top right hand, there's a little toggle switch, like a little arrow in either direction, where you could theoretically change that direction around. However, I will say this. There are standard quoting conventions throughout the FX markets. And the typical convention is that the currency that tends to trade at a premium relative to the other one is quoted first. And with dollar sterling, right, it's actually GBP USD because historically the pound has always been rich relative to the dollar. This is why you can see it in a much more exaggerated way, why dollar yen is always quoted USD JPY, because it's like hundreds of yen to the dollar. So it's much easier to be like, oh, it's 200, blah, 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 versus 0.0000 because it's 1 over. And you can better understand the units, the orders of magnitude, right? And it's quoted out to 5 digits. So if dollar sterling was trading at 132, at the top of the screen, you have 1.32, and then below it, you have 2 numbers on either side. You have 20 on the left and 30 on the right. And on the left, it says sell. And on the right, it says buy. So that means that the market at the time was 1.3220 at 1.3230. So he says, make me a price in $50. In my mind, that means since the trade was to sell dollar sterling, make me a market in 50 million US dollars worth of this trade where I can sell sterling against US dollars. You just back into the correct notionals, la-di-da-di-da, right? Using that conversion factor of the currency and where it's traded. The thing is that even though the convention is GBP USD, when you are trading FX, the currency that you say is the thing you're doing the action to. So if it's, okay, make me a market where I can buy $50 million, that's buy US dollars versus sterling. That's still the right way on the trade, but it would be very different numbers. It wouldn't be one spot 3220 at one spot 3230. It would be 0.756 something. So she quotes him that market again in just those tail numbers, 20 at 30. Because you have the convention of sterling always being quoted first, it should be pretty hard to screw this up. And you can always clarify these things with a client. She said, you want to sell this. That's the trade idea from the meeting. So she says 20 at 30. And he goes, okay, yeah, 30, $50. So she clicks buy. So what happened in that trade is she ended up selling him sterling instead of him selling sterling. And she ended up buying dollars from him instead of him buying dollars. That's very clearly what happened. And when she hangs up the phone, Eric's like, sounds like something happened. And she's like, yeah, he's going to hold off on that big trade idea, but I got him to do some dollar sterling, which was the trade idea. And he's like, did he sell? And she goes, no, he bought. And Eric's like, what? At these levels? And Harper looks back at the screen and you can see her starting to sweat. Yeah. And it's very clear that something has gone wrong. But even as an experience, and I'm not an FX salesperson, but as someone who's a decently experienced participant in the markets, I actually think if you played a court transcript of this conversation, I'm still not sure that Harper did anything. I think the biggest sin that Harper committed based on the conversation that they had was maybe she had the notional amount wrong. If she did 50 million US dollars and it really should be 50 million pounds or whatever, and they backed into it. So she said he bought sterling versus dollars. That was not what the trade should be, but he lifted the offer that she made. So he bought something. If he thought he was buying dollars, to be honest, the handle on that trade would have been off by 35 pips. It would have been 60 something, not 20 at 30 something. These currencies only move so much intraday. So quite frankly, he had no business doing this trade if he was so out of touch with where the market was, right? And I got it. He was walking back to his desk. He's not necessarily looking at his screens. Now, Harper could have done something and said, hey, so just to confirm, you bought 50 million sterling at 132.30, right? Just saying the handles is the problem. There's not enough communication in the terms of the execution to be really clear what's happening here. And from that freeze frame of the screen that I saw, they make it look like she went the wrong way because she didn't flip it to USD GBP. I just would be hard pressed to, and again, not an FX salesperson or a trader, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I've just never seen USD GBP as like no one says that, no one quotes that. It's just no one quotes JPY USD because it's 0.0000, you know what I'm saying? So you just go with the conventions and there's an established priority of how these things are quoted. So I could see a scenario where she went the right way based on what he said on that recorded line and just the notional was wrong. And if anything, he probably did too much and needs to scale back that trade. So that's where I really struggle with this as a depiction of a wrong way trade.
Yeah. Well, to your point, there was two other things, which is number one, always repeat what somebody wants. I mean, this is when you, as a waitress, I know that. But also, you talked with this a little bit, I think, in the last episode, which is it's really rare for a salesperson to book a trade. So, that's also very strange that she's on the phone with the client and that she's actually the one executing. It should be that she's on the phone and then it's Rishi, whatever, do this thing.
Yeah, because Rishi would obviously trade FX.
Right, of course. Well, I mean, again, he's got to add to his, his little minimum macro hedge fund. So, but that also, just back to your initial point, which is it's relatively rare to have a salesperson who is also executing trades. Now, I think you also talked about like sometimes like there are sales traders, and I think that's more common in like the equities space. But like with these types of things,
they may exist in FX, but typically it's firms that have an agency relationship on behalf of like that fiduciary duty, that fiduciary agency relationship that you were talking about. That Eric is like, we don't have that.
You don't have that.
Like,
Yeah. 100%.
So I guess in the world of industry, Harper is salesperson and sales trader as well. But I will say, to your point, this is why salespeople don't execute trades, right? Like there are checks and balances at multiple points in this process that should have kept something from going wrong like this. I've been in Harper's shoes. I told this story on the big podcast where I had a client. He was like a good friend. I'd been covering him for many years at different macro hedge funds. And he was a junior trader who was finally running some money at a big, well-known macro hedge fund. And he called the morning of a bond auction and he was like, hey, blah, blah, blah. I had the craziest night last night. I'm so hungover, like barely should be in the office. Oh, I'm thinking of putting on a steepener into the bond auction today. I'm like, cool, sounds good, blah, blah, blah. And we don't need to go over what a steepener is right now. But so an hour or two later, he gives me a call and he's like, hey, and he asked me where he could put on a flattener. And, you know, customer is always right. And these are U.S. treasuries that people are trading. I had some clients who would trade out of U.S. treasury positions for like 10 million bonds, like 50 times a day as voice trades who didn't want to use TradeWeb. It was a fucking nightmare. But anyways, so you can trade in all these things with anyone. You don't have to do it with the same counterparty. So I was like, oh, I guess he put on a steepener earlier and he's just unwinding it with me. I didn't ask the question, right? So we execute the flattener. Well, sure enough, 5 hours later, after the market has moved a ton steeper, I get a call and he's like, hey, you need to call your middle office guys. They think I put on a flattener. And obviously I put on a steepener. I was like, oh my God. Like I've never, I mean, like my heart dropped through the floor. I was like, no, you put on a flattener. And I mean, 7 years of friendship, whatever it was, like immediately out the door. And it was like, I want your fucking head. I'm going to pull the tapes. He was like, there's no way in hell I put on a flattener. I never in a million years. I told you I wanted a steepener earlier this morning. And I was like, yeah, I assumed that you were just in and out of the market. And that was my fault for assuming. So he pulled the tapes on me. He had the senior portfolio manager pull the recording of our entire conversation. And by the way, these tapes back in 2010 or whatever this was, it wasn't like a podcast where you could fast forward to the part where she made where you gave the inquiry. Yeah, exactly. They had to sit there in an office and listen to hours and hours of him being like, I'm so hungover. I shouldn't be in the office, blah, blah, blah. Sure enough, we get to the trade and he went the wrong way. And I just did what he was telling me to do because I didn't think to question. And so after that, I never again did a trade without being like almost over the top in my execution of being like, offer this, blah, blah, blah. You bought this, you did that. There's good execution protocol. Neither Harper nor Aubrey, by the way, followed any of that. And Harper should have been in better control of the trade. But it's very clear that she got flustered by suddenly being able to execute this. We haven't seen her great with execution so far anyways. She was just so focused on getting something done. She didn't care what he did and wasn't thinking about what he actually needed or wanted, which was to sell Sterling.
Right. Yeah, you get the sense that there's something that's going to come from this. But like, as someone watching it the first time, the only reason I thought for a second she might have gone the wrong way was after Eric says, oh, like buying at that level. And then you see her kind of like lean in.
It like zooms in on her sweaty face.
Yeah, but it's hard to know if she realizes that she did the wrong thing yet or if she's just doubting herself. I think she's doubting herself.
I think she's doubting herself. Like, wait, he said bye, right?
Yeah.
I sold him something. He said bye. Why does this suddenly feel wrong? And that's how I'm feeling as the viewer watching it. Like, okay, he did, like, he asked you for a market. You quoted him an offer and he lifted the offer. Like, what's so bad about that? You didn't do anything wrong. And that's the convention for how this is quoted. I'm sorry. So like, if he in his mind wants to flip it, okay. But like, I just don't think that would happen. And I ran this by a couple of traders and that was their view as well, that you wouldn't quote it like that.
So The next episode we're not obviously doing today, but I know Jen, you were saying like it was like so stressful you had to like leave the room. So
my husband, who's a trader, had to leave the room when we were watching the next episode. He was like, you dragged me in here to watch this with you. I need to go like take an Excedrin, lie down in a cold, dark room and never watch this show again.
It's too close to home, I assume.
He was just like, this is the most stressful, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Watching people make bad decisions. It's like watching a slow motion car crash.
100%. All right. So back with our friends, Gus and Robert. So now they're out at dinner This is the second dinner where you see Robert out with Clement. And now it's like the broader group of the CPS desk, but it's Gus, it's Theo, it's Clement.
It's just Clement's people. It's
Clement's people.
Yeah. Theo,
and
Gus's
Theo.
boyfriend, because he was working on a trade idea with Theo for Usman.
Right. And so what was interesting about this dinner, so we had the lunch where the drinking thing was like an issue, where Robert like drinking almost by himself. And then now they're doing wine, and Usman puts his hand over the wine glass as they're going to go and like pour wine. He's like, I don't drink. So, okay. And so it's like Robert kind of thinking, oh, I can like pal around with this guy and show him a good time. And like clearly he's like, no, I don't drink. Well, anyway, throughout the course of this dinner, Clement's there making, again, a bunch of like inappropriate comments. It was like just some wildly inappropriate stuff. And then finally, they finished drinking. They clearly had a lot to drink. And they were clearly going to a strip club because they were like, all right, so we're done now. We're going to go like to some ladies. Theo leaves also. So Usman is there now with Robert and Gus. And as soon as the guys leave, he chugs the wine. And he's like, it's just easier if my boss thinks I'm conservative. And so that's almost like a sign now to Robert that like, all right, this guy actually might be someone who I can form a relationship with. Because again, like Robert's way of connecting is really kind of more on the partying side. And so then they go to a gay bar, which was the one that Robert initially suggested he wanted to go with Gus. Gus is upset about Theo. Like there's still that whole little angle. And so as they're at the bar, clearly Usman is having a great time and Gus gets really drunk and then wants to leave. And it's interesting because you start to see this transition where in the beginning of the episode, it was all about Gus coming in, outshining Robert because he's doing all the work and all that. But then because Robert is now entertaining him, showing him a good time, it reminded me of that scene in Succession where Kendall was like, yeah, where Roman went and took a whole bunch of guys out to go get the inside scoop, where Kendall's like sitting there trying and like working hard and reading. And of course, the one who actually gets ahead is Roman. And so ultimately, Gus says that to Robert, go back and close this client, whatever. I'm going over to Theo's. And now Gus is there making some bad decisions.
No, I think you 100% nailed that. And there's a couple of things that are said during this dinner that support all of this. So at the beginning, Theo is getting ragged on. Theo is in research by Clement, the old school sales guy, who says one meeting with management is worth 1,000 research reports. So Theo's being subjected to this dinner. Yeah. And he's like, it's good to know that I'm valued then. And Clement pays it off and all in good fun. And he's like, nobody's going to tell you they love you, Theo. We'll cut to Gus, who's like, I love you. He's sitting there looking at him longingly across the table. Now, Robert thinks he's in on the joke with Clement. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's not like people pay for research. And Usman is playing it totally straight. And he goes, no, that's exactly what we pay for. Okay, but how does research actually get paid for? And that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, because fixed income strategy and research is totally different from equities research. It's viewed very differently by clients.
This is so interesting because talking about how the different divisions are set up, and it's like fixed income, it's sales, trading, and research. Whereas in the equities world, it's sales and trading. Research is a separate division. So it's so funny that fixed income, like research is part of it, whereas equities, it's totally off into separate worlds.
Yeah. And I mean, who even really understands how equity sales and trading is configured anymore? So many of these banks are really winding down a lot of their focus on that aspect of their business. But research and strategy and fixed income were always, I mean, they sit on the trading floor with sales and trading. They're part of the mix. They're getting on the phone with clients, but there's no walls, right? They don't have confidential information. This is all public markets research for the most part. And it always was historically this gentleman's agreement of like, we give you this great research, you pay us back in the form of bid offer. Well, things started to get more and more complex and fee structures started evolving and stuff like that. And there was actually this pretty radical reform that happened in the last decade in the EU and in the UK called MiFID and MiFID 2. And this was after my time, so I wasn't there for like MiFID compliance or whatever. It stands for Markets in Financial Instruments Directive. And basically they imposed a huge number of regulations on this, trying to increase transparency of like what you could charge for, what you couldn't charge for, like whom you could charge, all those different things. But again, the bottom line is, and we had this conversation with Dominique Toublon, who's the head of credit strategy at Barclays. He was like, it's thrown in with everything else. There is no separate fee structure for that. And so what Usman is really saying here is, I pay for the hard intelligence. I pay for the trade ideas, really trying to put on a good show in front of Casper. He's like, I don't care about sales and relationships. And to your point, when he declines the offer of wine and says, I pay for research, flying in the face of what Robert did, trying to join him with Clement and the joking, Robert's panicking. He's like, okay, that's all I got, right? A stupid joke and wine and getting you drunk and throwing out with you. And so Robert's terrified that if he can't get chummy with him, his relationship with Usman isn't going anywhere. Yeah. So when it comes out that when Casper leaves the table and Usman suddenly like, time to party and rip the wig off and let's go. We're going to this gay club and I'm going to have fun and like blah, 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 blah. Robert's like, oh, thank God. And Gus is the one who's thrown on his back foot. Gus, who's the one, like you said, who had thought he could outshine Robert, who's just the relationship guy, right? I'm Gus. I'm the brain. Gus looks totally out of his depth. And Gus is the guy who's gay at this table. They are at a gay club. Robert, who seems to be like trisexual, and Usman, who we don't know what his leanings are, but these guys are having the time of their life at this gay club. Gus looks straight up miserable, even though this is a place where being gay is celebrated.
At the club, clearly Gus is miserable. He's drunk at this point. He just wants to go see Theo, and he goes to try to get in a cab. Robert chases him and is like, come back. What are you doing?
Robert's a good friend.
He is. And he's looking out for him. He doesn't want him to go see Theo, A, because Theo is terrible. And B, he also wants him to come back in because, again, they're trying to both get the client. And Gus is just like, no, I'm leaving. I'm going to wherever Theo lives. And Robert's like, no, I'm coming home with you. And Gus is basically like, no, go back in, get the client. Like, you're the winner, basically. And he ends up going to see Theo. And Robert ultimately does end up establishing Usman is kind of like his guy, and he's the contact person with Usman, which is
because great. Robert's a hard partier and Usman's a hard partier. So Robert did exactly what Clement wanted at the end of the day. Clement never wanted Gus's talents. Clement wanted Robert to be a little mini-me. And continuing our theme of the depiction of like all sex and relationships in the show just looking absolutely awful and miserable, you've got Theo and Gus hooking up while allegedly his live-in girlfriend is upstairs.
Yeah. And then, did we talk about the hinge date yet?
We touched briefly on it, but that is the continuation of the depiction of sex in the modern era as looking terribly bleak.
Yes. So Harper is now trying to sleep with someone. So she picks out a guy and they match or whatever. They go to meet at this, I don't know, like divey bar and pub. Sorry, pub. We're in London now.
I think that's what bars generally look like in London.
Whatever, fine. A not divey bar, a pub. And so they sit down. He's looking around and she's like, oh, is this like a multiple choice date? Like, did you have a backup in case I wasn't what you were expecting? And they're like talking. And then finally she's like, what do you think is the record in the shortest amount of time before? And he's like, what? And then they leave and obviously go sleep together. And meanwhile,
it's very transactional. Which I think speaks to the broader theme that's evolving in Harper's relationships. And maybe that's an extension of her trying to inhabit the space, the mind space that Eric's trying to get her in. Maybe it's a continuation of the theme, because not only are we subjected to this sex scene between Harper and random rugby player or whatever.
Yes,
but
who looks like
Yasmin.
Yes.
Yasmin is sitting there in her home having to listen to all this. So apparently Gus's girlfriend couldn't hear anything that's going on.
I know.
But Yasmin can hear everything while she's trying to have a nice cozy night or whatever. And she's just miserable listening to this after she has been rejected multiple times by her boyfriend. So Harper's got a flirtation with Robert. She's getting all the glory at work. And now she's hooking up with some dude. Why did
who looks like her boyfriend?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And so as they're coming out of their room, Yasmin is sitting in a chair just drinking a glass of wine. She's like, I'm just trying to unwind. Meanwhile, Harper's like, I thought you went to bed. And in her head, Yasmin's probably like, well, I was trying to, but it was too loud. So she's out having her wine. And then the guy leaves and she says to Harper, she's like, oh, I thought that was Seb at first. And she was like, that's kind of why I picked him. But then she says as a parting gift, she like pulls out a bag of, I believe, pot.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, of something. And Yasmin goes, what is that, a performance bonus? And she's like, I think it was his attempt at chivalry. And so then they go outside and they smoke. And it sort of felt like smoking a peace pipe, because then at the end, Yaz says, I think if you want to pay rent, you should. And Harper replies, that's a really good idea. And I do also think that there's probably a little bit of, again, back to the initial point, Harper not wanting to feel like she's intruding and feeling like you pay. Like,
Yes.
I always kind of said this. You and I, when we first started this business, we needed to get a lawyer, and we had friends who would do it for free. But I think we both felt like we would prefer to pay someone because, I mean, it's like if someone's doing something for free, it's always a favor. And like, you can't get people to do things on time. Like, it just, it's like, I feel like we'd rather
You're at their
pay.
mercy.
Yes.
You're at their mercy.
Exactly.
Because you owe them something that hasn't been settled.
Whereas here now, if Harper is paying, she feels like this is now her place. It's not a favor that Yasmin is doing. It's something that she is actually paying for. And now it is her space. It's not her intruding. It's her space. And so I think that made a lot of sense. And it made complete sense in my mind why she would want to do it. I get why Yasmin was uncomfortable because, again, it's not her house. So like
I don't think I think that's probably part of it. But I think it's more like Yasmin keeps trying to get power over people through relationships, not necessarily through transactions. Whereas Harper is so much more transactional. There's always an arm's distance with Harper of like, what am I getting out of this? Where is it going for me? And I think Yasmin truly wanted Harper as a friend.
I was going to say that. 100%.
If I have you live with me, then you'll be my friend. And Harper's like, the two things are totally unrelated. I don't see how these, like, what's the correlation between friendship and living together?
That is spot on, and that actually continues. I don't know how far you've gotten in this season.
No, like, I've stopped. I stopped after
I'm not going to give you any spoiler.
I didn't want to know.
But I think you summed up entirely. I do think Yasmin genuinely likes Harper and wants to be her friend, even though she's jealous about certain things and everything. But I think she genuinely wants to be friends, and I think Harper does not see her in the same way.
I will say this. Listen, I've had a hard time forgetting the incident from the first episode when Yasmin was a party to that conversation that Harper overheard in the bathroom about how Harper didn't deserve to be there. Maybe Harper isn't still thinking about that, but shit, I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah.
That's the kind of comment that sticks with you. And I know Harper took it as fire and motivation to be like, F you, you don't think I'm good enough, I'll show you. But man, like, even though Yasmin wasn't the one saying it, the fact that she was just like, oh, tee-hee, that's terrible, versus being like, yo, you can't say that about someone. Like the way that then Harper stood up for Yasmin at the dinner and was like, you can't speak to her that way. I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. Yasmin's a little more like Robert of like, what do I need to be so you'll be my friend? And it's like, maybe I need you to have a spine.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. But I do think that Yasmin genuinely wants to be her friend and does like her, and they do develop a friendship. But you know how it's like in a relationship, one person always likes the other person more? I do think that Yasmin wants to be friends more than Harper.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, So.
Which is also why I relate so hard to Yasmin. I have Yasmin. I always like people more than they like me. Okay, so really quick, I want to introduce something to these episodes. I want to know who we're bullish on, who we're bearish on, and like who the winners and losers are of this episode.
Oh, I love that.
I'm bullish on Daria.
Okay. I would say,
I really like Daria after this episode.
I'm bullish on, I think there was a flip that happened. Going into the episode, I was bullish on Gus and I was bearish on Robert. And then by the end, I think it flipped. I think, unfortunately, bearish on Gus.
Oh, and we should clarify. Are we bullish or bearish as far as their career trajectory?
Career.
Sorry,
career.
Okay.
No. Just as far as their career.
I'm bearish on Daria after pissing Eric off then.
Yeah. No.
I just liked her better as a manager.
Oh, yeah.
No. Well, we could do this from any angle.
we can flip it each time. Be like, who are we bearish on and who are we bullish on?
And why?
In terms of
Just pick a reason why. It can be from any standpoint. I 100%, Robert's star is on the rise and Gus is falling swiftly. He is getting a big wake-up call now that he's in CPS relative to IBD.
If I need to short someone, I'm shorting Theo. Like, Theo annoys me. I don't like him. Theo's the worst. He just is like pretentious. He's your sort of traditional research person. But to have a live-in girlfriend and be cheating on her, like, no. Again, he's hurting two people. Obviously, his girlfriend and then Gus, and that's what Robert keeps saying. Like, this is not going to end well for you. And again, Gus knows that. But for any person who's ever been in a bad relationship and like been chasing someone, it's not going to go well. So.
How are we feeling about Eric and Harper? I'm kind of like neutral on Eric after I was massively bullish on him and starting to get more bearish on Harper here.
I'm going to agree with all that. Eric, I do feel like he's this character that like, I still think he's the best character in the show. He's just objectively the best character.
Complex.
But he's
and
not
I know they all are, but
good.
yeah.
And he's not bad. I think that as a human and a salesperson, I think his ethics are maybe a little questionable. But as a manager, I think he does really care about Harper. Even if, again, it's like one of those things, like he cares about her and he's looking out for her. And then he's also like jealous that she's like going and like working with Daria. So there's multiple things that are going on. But I'm with you. I think neutral right now. He lost the desk like 60% of their profits, which is a huge problem, which is why he's so stressed out about needing to get money in. So that's not great for anybody.
All right, guys. Well, we'll catch you next time for episode 4. And if you're enjoying this content, please, please, please leave us a review. This is a baby show, so we don't have any reviews yet. So we really appreciate anything, any kind words, any enjoyment you've gotten out of this. Please give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
All right.
We'll see you
Thanks,
next
guys.
time.
Bye.